video on this channel where I really like to discuss books and reading. If you're new here, hi, my name is Lillian. I have a feeling that today's video is going to be on the longer side, so if you have a chance, feel free to pause now, go grab yourself a nice beverage, a little snack, because I'm going to be looking back over my favorite books of 2022 and going over my reading year in general. But before we get into the meat of today's video, I wanted to remind folks that I'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the month in order to celebrate reaching 400 subscribers. So if there are any questions that you have for me, book related or not, feel free to leave them down below or send them to me on Instagram. Again, thank you to everyone who has already sent me a question. I really appreciate it. And also thank you to everyone who has subscribed in the last 3 months that I've been making videos here on YouTube. I've really loved getting to chat with you all about books in the comments and seeing some of you also start making videos yourself. So to kick off today's video, I wanted to do a little bit of a look back and an overview at my 2022 reading year, and then I'm going to get into my favorite books in each of the categories. I'll be going over fiction, nonfiction, graphic novels, and poetry. If there's a particular section that you are interested in hearing about, I will leave timestamps for all of the different sections in the doobly-doo below. And with that, let's get into the meat of this video. So starting off with the overview, I have a few screenshots here from my Storygraph profile. If you're interested in friending me on Storygraph, the link will be in the doobly-doo for that. But Storygraph is where I generally track the majority of my reading. I really enjoy its interface and all of the different analytics and data points that it will show you about your reading, because quite honestly, I am that kind of nerd. So last year, 2022, I read a total of 126 books, which surpassed my goal to read 100 books last year, and all of those books totaled 30,349 pages. According to Storygraph, the top 5 themes of the books that I was reading last year were adventurous, emotional, dark, reflective, and mysterious. As far as the pace of the books that I read last year goes, the majority of it was medium paced at around 42%, but for the most part, it was actually pretty evenly distributed between fast, medium, and slow-paced. Most of the books that I read last year were on the shorter side. I read a lot of graphic novels, I've read poetry collections, which is why 65% of the books that I read last year were under 300 pages. I definitely read a lot more fiction than I did nonfiction last year, and I think actually the majority of the nonfiction that I read last year is being categorized as such because it's poetry. I've set a goal for myself in 2023 to read more of the nonfiction that I have on my shelf, and so I'm hoping to see a little bit of a different percentage for this statistic in 2023. As far as genres go, fantasy, as you can see, kind of blew everything else out of the water. In true form, I read quite a lot of fantasy last year, as well as romance. I started venturing into romance as a genre and not just as a subplot in the books that I read. And then I'm also really happy to see that queer fiction is pretty high on this list, followed by historical fiction and comics. And then last but not least, for this overview, I wanted to show you the line graph showing the distribution of how many books I read per month and generally how many pages I read a month. It's really interesting for me to look at this chart and think back on what was going on in my life during these different months, what caused these up and down fluctuations. For example, in April of last year, I read 0 books, and then things started to pick up around August, and I read 27 books at the end of the year in December. Quite honestly, I had a little bit of a wild reading year, a wild year in general in 2022. As you can see, my reading really started to pick up in August of this past year, and that kind of corresponds with me leaving a very toxic work situation that was just draining my soul. I had ended up in a particular spot of pretty intense burnout and just reconnecting with things that I knew brought me joy and also reinvigorated my faith in humanity, if I'm gonna be very honest. So as you can see, August is when my reading for last year really started to take off, and then I also started making YouTube videos in October of last year. Okay, let's finally talk about the favorite books that I read last year. I'm going to be dividing this up into different sections. I'm gonna start with graphic novels, move on to poetry, then nonfiction, and then finally fiction. Again, if there is a certain section that you are more interested in, I will leave the timestamps for each of the sections in the doobly-doo below. You can click through them if you want. Starting off with graphic novels, I really dove into graphic novels in 2022 and ended up finding some really good ones that I now consider as some of my all-time favorites. So in this section I have 2 individual volumes and then 2 series that I'm going to talk about, and starting off I wanted to talk about Abbott by Saladin Ahamed, with Sammy Cavella as the illustrator and Jason Wordie as the colorist. This came out in 2018 and was published by Boom Studios. Our main character is Elena Abbott, who is an investigative journalist in the city of Detroit in the 1970s, writing stories about police corruption and brutality throughout the city. She starts investigating a series of pretty grisly crimes that involve black male victims that the police are sort of ignoring or not really interested in investigating, that come to find out have a supernatural twist to them that has ties to Elena's past. Everything about this story and this graphic novel is so sharp. The mystery itself is really engaging. The events of this story are really well paced. The characters really have a sense of nuance and a 3D presence on the page. Not to mention the main character, Elena Abbott, is an absolute badass and I adore her. Next up, I'm going to talk about the graphic novel Mamo by Sas Milledge. This came out last year from Boombox, which I believe is a subsidiary of Boom Studios. This is a really beautiful story of characters who are attempting to reconcile the responsibilities or unwanted responsibilities that have been forced upon them with their own dreams of the future and the people that they want to become. We follow two main characters, Orla, who is a hedge witch who has been compelled to return home in the wake of her grandmother's death, and Joe, a resident of the town who is desperate to find a cure for her mother's sudden mysterious illness, as well as find a way to set things right in a town that is slowly being overtaken by the landscape. The story and the art in this graphic novel are utterly breathtaking, and I highly recommend it. Next, let's talk about the first graphic novel series that I'm going to mention, and that is The Invisible Kingdom, volumes 1 through 3 by Willow Willowson and Christian Ward as the artist. This came out between 2019 and 2021 with Burger Books. This is a wonderful 3-part sci-fi drama that follows a cast of characters as they uncover an embezzlement scheme at the hands of their galaxy's two major powerhouses, one being an overlord megacorporation and the other an obscure religious order. We follow the subsequent fallout, journeys of self-discovery, and battles for survival while the crew and cast are being hunted by the powers that be. I had so much fun reading these series. I adored the characters, I enjoyed a lot of the themes that are brought up in this graphic novel series, and I also really loved the queer romance that is present in this series as well. And next I'm going to talk about what might be my favorite graphic novel series of all time, and that is the Pretty Deadly series volumes 1 to 3 that I discovered this past year. I'm not sure if this series is finished. I hope it's not. I hope they bring out more volumes, but this is by Kelly Sue DeConnick and Emma Rios, who is the illustrator. So far, the 3 volumes have been published between 2014 and 2020 by Image Comics. I feel like the premise of this series is kind of hard to define in words, but I will try my best. This is a story that follows mythical figures who are embodied inside a tale of revenge and cosmic reckoning. We follow Reapers, who are the archetypes of luck, of revenge, of lust, of greed, etc. Their origins, their battles, their downfalls played out amongst the complex lives of the humans who know them and who call on them for assistance. I feel like the story is like nothing I've ever read in a graphic novel before. The story itself is epic, it's lush, it's unflinching, it's pretty violent, just a heads up. And both the writing and the illustration in this series is absolutely gorgeous. Next, let's talk about my favorite poetry collections from this past year. I didn't end up reading as much poetry as I usually do in 2022, but I still managed to come across what has become my current favorite poetry collection of all time, as well as a pretty close second. And I think, to no one's surprise, not even my own, both of these collections are by Mary Oliver. My favorite collection of the year, and at the moment of all time, is Dreamwork by Mary Oliver. This was originally published in 1986 by Atlantic Monthly Press. I think I read this collection in the first month or two of 2022, and it utterly consumed me. It's one that in the past year I have frequently gone back to, just opened up to a random page and read a poem or two when I needed comfort, when I needed inspiration, when I just needed the level of serotonin that only Mary Oliver can really give my brain. This is a collection of 45 poems that came out after her collection American Primitive won the Pulitzer Prize in 1983, which is a collection of hers that I have yet to read. But Dreamwork, like I was saying, is currently my favorite collection of all time. It's one that I have repeatedly bought as gifts for friends and family and just sort of thrust it into their hands and sort of quietly yelled at them to please read this. The other Mary Oliver collection that I read for the first time and absolutely adored this year is Blue Horses, that came out in 2014 with Penguin Press. I still rank this collection as being top tier for me, one of my favorites of all time, and I don't want to give the impression that this collection is not incredible just because I'm putting it behind Dreamwork. I think that the conduit or the magic of Mary Oliver's work is her wrestling with what it really means to truly belong to this world, to be of and a part of the natural world, to live in it, and to be attuned to all of its subtle shifts and changes. She contends with both questions of purpose and of life itself in her work, but also the smaller emotions, the smaller details and fissures that can come together and make a life. And she does this through the lens of what we might initially think of as the mundane, the everyday, as well as the observations of natural beauty. I wanted to give a strong honorable mention to this collection. This is When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through, a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry. This was put together by Joy Harjo, Leanne Howe, and Jennifer Elise Forrester. This was published in 2020 by W.W. Norton and Company. And the reason this gets an honorable mention is because I'm actually not done reading it. I have been slowly making my way through this collection, but it felt wrong to not give it a nice mention in this video. I've really been enjoying this collection in the past couple of months. This is a first of its kind compilation and comprehensive anthology of Indigenous poetry. It's divided into 5 geographic regions and features historic oral tales, songs, poems, and each section moves chronologically from the past to the present, with current day Native and Indigenous poets. Again, this has been a joy to read, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to read it in 2023. Next, I have 2 favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2022 that I wanted to share. The first being Without You, There Is No Us, My Time with the Sons of North Korea's Elite by Suki Kim. This came out initially in 2014 from Crown Press. This is a really powerful account of Suki Kim's time going undercover as a Christian missionary at an elite boarding school in order to teach English to the sons of the elite members of the North Korean political regime, Communist Party. The book itself is part journalistic investigation, part memoir. It's beautifully written. Suki Kim seamlessly weaves in her personal observations and reflections on what she's experiencing at this boarding school, along with reflections on her own family who are from South Korea before they immigrated to the United States, her family's history and experience with the Korean War and the heartbreak that they experienced, as well as pretty much every family in Korea experienced, the unhealed wounds of a country that has been violently divided for 70 plus years at this point. She documents the really intense mental and emotional strain that she is under due to the high level of surveillance that she is under while teaching English. You see the really tender and heartbreaking relationships that she develops with her students, who on one hand are simultaneously very lovable and engaging, but who also chronically lie, misdirect, and exhibit signs of deep brainwashing from the dictatorship that they have been raised under. The other nonfiction book that I wanted to mention is Animal Vegetable Miracle, A Year of Food Life by Barbara Kingsolver. This was published in 2007 by Harper Perennial. And before I get into discussing this book, I just wanted to mention that the HarperCollins union is currently on strike as of filming this video. They're fighting to negotiate contracts that will allow them to be paid a living wage in order to live and work in New York City, where HarperCollins and several of the other large publishing houses have reported record profits in the last several years. So I'll put links in the description of this video that will give you more information on the situation, how you can help, and I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that information before I dove into a book that was published by HarperCollins. So Animal Vegetable Miracle is a chronological account of the author Barbara Kingsolver and her family's experience growing the majority of their own food over the span of a year, and if not, obtaining it locally. And by locally, I think it was either within a 50 or 100 mile radius from where they were living, they considered to be local. The book itself is full of really personal and amusing anecdotes from their time doing this project, which is also accompanied by their reasoning behind why they decided to make this decision as a family, their relationship with food systems, the current ecological devastation that is being wrought on the environment by the industrial farming system in the US and around the world, the lack of resilience in US food supply chains, as well as the often widespread cultural disregard for US farmers and the problems that they are facing. This book is open and inviting, but it also certainly doesn't shy away from having these difficult conversations and talking about some of the hard-hitting statistics that back up a lot of the reasoning that is behind their decision to do this project. It serves as this family's testament as to why they decided to take on this year-long project, the ups and downs of it as they're recounting it to you, but also it's being told with an outstretched hand to the reader that offers to bring them along for the ride and have them start to reconsider and contemplate their own relationship with their food systems, their food waste, and reevaluating their own place within food systems and their relationship to them. Okay, we have made it to the fiction section of this video. I have my 10 favorite books that I read in 2022 to discuss with you. All of these were 5-star reads for me, and I'm not recounting any of them in any particular order, not doing a hierarchy or a ranking. These are all just books that I really enjoyed and really loved in the last year. First, I wanted to talk about A Memory Called Empire and A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martin. These are 2 of the books in her Text Kalan series. They were published in 2019 and 2021, respectively, by Tor. These are 2 beautifully crafted sci-fi books that follow a diplomat from the outer reaches of the galaxy as she navigates political drama, chess moves, assassination attempts, and the search to solve the mystery of her predecessor's murder in the capital of the ever-hungry, ever-conquering empire of Text Kalan. Our main character, Mahit, is fighting to maintain her people's sovereignty in the face of a rapidly developing coup situation at the heart of the empire, while also internally wrestling with her love and admiration for the art and the culture, the music of Text Kalan, of this empire, while at the same time knowing that the empire looks down on anything outside of it as being uncivilized, kind of barbaric, and knowing that they are looking to devour her own native station, her own people, and assimilate them into their quote-unquote civilized society. Both books are incredibly engaging, expertly crafted, and also present the reader with the dilemma of having to try and maintain a sense of identity in the face of empire, in the face of colonization, and how colonization and imperialism can wreak havoc on someone's sense of self-identity and value. Next, let's talk about The High House by Jessie Greengrass. This came out last year from Scribner. I think the best way that I can sort of summarize this book in one sentence is a pastoral apocalypse novel. In this book, we follow 3 different people in their attempts to make a home in the wake of ecological disaster rendered by the ravages of the climate crisis. The story itself is mainly told in a series of flashbacks from these 3 different characters, showing us how they got to where they are, their reflections on it, as well as their current reality of trying to survive in the ecological devastation that has been left in the wake of rising sea levels, of mass flooding. It's a really profound look at parenthood, at sacrifice, at love, as well as grief in the face of extinction brought on by the climate catastrophe. This book is impeccably written. It is both devastating and cathartic at the same time, and it's one that has definitely haunted me since I read it. Next, let's talk about The Black God's Drums by P. DeJolle Clark. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. This came out in 2018 by Tor. I actually read and enjoyed a number of this author's works in the last year. The Black God's Drums is the one where it felt like all of the pieces came together and just fit perfectly. Clark's work is often speculative and deals with alternative histories and has elements of sci-fi and fantasy. And this was a novella of his that I read last year where I felt he really exhibited his incredible craftsmanship. I don't have too extensive of an experience with novellas, but for me and the ones that I've read previously, this felt like the strongest novella that I have come across thus far. The story itself fit perfectly within the shortened format without feeling like anything was lost or not expounded on. Everything was beautifully timed. All of the characters felt very distinct and fully realized. The story was really engaging and the mystery was interesting. To give you a short summary of what this book is actually about, it is an alternative history set in a steampunk New Orleans where a young teen is desperate to leave the city and join the crew of the smuggler ship, the Midnight Robber, and accidentally uncovers a plot that involves a kidnapped Haitian scientist and a connection with the African Orisha that has been whispering in her ear. Next up is Christmas Days, 12 Stories and 12 Feasts for 12 Days by Jeanette Winterson. This was originally published in 2016 by Grove Press, and if you have the chance to listen to the audiobook version of this, I would highly recommend that you do it. The voice actor that narrates the short stories does an incredible job with them, and then Jeanette Winterson herself narrates the personal essays that are sprinkled throughout this collection. This is a collection of 12 of Jeanette Winterson's short stories, infused with the magic, the emotion, and the transformation involved in the Christmas season, spread between 12 personal essays and recipes that talk about Jeanette Winterson's food traditions for Christmas time and the New Year. I don't think I've ever been this moved by a holiday-related book in my life. It had me in turn weeping and giggling. Plus, I discovered that Jeanette Winterson could probably read me her grocery list and make it sound interesting, not only with her incredible writing skill, but also just the sound of her voice is very lovely. The next book that I want to talk about is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I read this in the earlier part of 2022. This was originally published in 1925 by Hogarth Press. I listened to this on audiobook and it actually took me several months to finish it. I had to repeatedly check it out several times from Hoopla. This is my first Virginia Woolf novel and I feel like I am forever changed having read it or listened to it. The reason it took me several months to get through is that the narration in this book is one that demands your full attention. Or at least for me it did. The stream of consciousness style of narration was one that I really had to focus on and pay attention to. It wasn't an audiobook that I could put on and, absentmindedly be cooking a meal, be doing laundry, doing chores, commuting. It was one that I had to sit down and be doing absolutely nothing in order to fully concentrate on and absorb the information, absorb the story, which in the end I found to be well worth doing, but just ended up taking me a little bit longer to get through because the time I was reading or listening to this in my life was just very busy and I was all over the place, and I actually had to restart it several times in order to remember where I was, but also I wanted to give this story and this book the full attention that I felt like it deserved. And in the end, I am so glad that I ended up taking my time with this book. I was utterly blown away by it. I'm sure this is news to probably no one, but Virginia Woolf is an incredibly skilled writer, and I feel like probably the majority of the things that I have to say about this book has probably already been said at length by many other people. But in addition to the incredible caliber of her craftsmanship as a writer, there's an added level of an enjoyment for me, and that was in getting to approach this story as a historical document. I was a history major that focused on World War I and its effects on both individuals and societies at large, and I couldn't help but pick up on the themes and assessments that Woolf was making about the society around her in the post-war era. The fissures that sit between pre-war society and reflections on Mrs. Dalloway's past and the present day that this story is taking place in and the post-war society that she is existing in. Two of the characters that we end up encountering in this book are one, a shell-shocked veteran of the Great War, and his wife, who is desperately trying to understand what is wrong with him, what has caused this huge change in his outlook, in his personality. So not only did I find it to be an incredible piece of literature, I also found it to be a really fascinating snapshot into Woolf's assessment of comparing pre- and post-war British society and individuals. The next book on my favorites list is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This came out in 2021 by Tor. This was a really lovely queer sci-fi romance that I listened to on audiobook at the beginning of last year. And we start off with an arranged marriage between two individuals that is supposed to serve as a band-aid for increasing tensions and political divide between two different worlds. I thought that the romance in this book was really, really well done. I think it explored some really heavy-hitting topics while also talking about what it means to be in a healthy relationship and having necessary healthy communication between yourself and your partner. And all of that was woven through a really interesting plot of political intrigue and sabotage that was really engaging. I will just add a small footnote to this mention. If you're interested in reading it, I would recommend that you look up any content or trigger warnings if that's something that you generally look up, but I would also just recommend it for this one. Like I said, there are some pretty heavy emotional topics that are discussed and worked through by the two characters. And next up we have another speculative novel about the future of the climate crisis, and that is Blackfish City by Sam J. Miller. This was originally published in 2018 by Echo. This is set in a much more distant future where humanity exists in a very different way than we currently do. They mainly exist in scattered groups and refugee camps around the world after major societal collapse and governmental collapse. The book is set on a floating city in the Arctic Circle after the climate wars. We follow 4 different perspectives in the city as they navigate huge wealth disparities, corruption within the city, and a new disease called the Breaks that has everyone on edge. Meanwhile, there is a newcomer to the city that is causing quite a stir. She is a woman riding on the back of an orca accompanied by a polar bear, and her arrival sets into motion the convergence of all of these characters, both their pasts and their presents. The world building in this novel I found to be particularly engrossing. It's definitely a world that I would be very interested in reading more from. We're close to the finish line here, folks, I promise. The next book I'm going to talk about is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This was published in 2020 by Tor. I won't spend too much time here just because I know that so much has been said about this book in the last 2 years that it's been published. If you're looking for a book that balances the wonder and magic of a middle grade fantasy with an adult protagonist and discussing some pretty heavy themes, this book tackles and has some really beautifully nuanced discussions about othering and the harm that can be done by institutions that are built on bias, regardless of whether or not there are certain individuals that have the best intentions and want to do good by the people that that institution is serving. Our main character is confronted with having to make the choice between following his professional guidelines to a T in backing his institution that for many years he has wholeheartedly devoted himself to and thought he was making a difference through, or realizing that not every situation or every individual can be measured or guided by an arbitrary set of rules that come from a fear-based mindset and are more focused on fostering control rather than compassion. I listened to this as an audiobook and I both cried and laughed out loud. This book was an absolute balm to my heart during a time when I really needed it. And last but not least, I'm going to mention Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler. This came out in 2017 by Rescue Press. If I had to pick a favorite book of 2022, I feel like it would be this one. I did a full in-depth review of this book, so if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on it, I will link it down below and in the cards. This is a story that follows Paul, who is a queer shapeshifter moving through the underground 90s punk and queer scenes, chasing intimacy and understanding from a world that is continually trying to put him in a box. This was nothing like I had ever read before. It honestly blew me away. Paul as a character feels so real and actualized on the page. The writing is incredibly sharp, funny, hypnotic, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I read it. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to give this video a thumbs up. That apparently helps. Tell me, what were some of your favorite books that you read in the last year? If you're interested in leaving me a comment for the Q&A at the end of the month, feel free to leave it in the comments below or send it to me on Instagram at paperbackstacks. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap up this video, make myself a cup of tea because my throat is a little bit sore for talking for this long. But I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.